Hello, everyone. So, I was working on this Raylib wrapper thingy the other day. The reason we're doing sort of a Raylib wrapper is so that my video game code can have a better... I sort of can make a wrapper around the Raylib stuff, and then later I can replace it with something else, like the implementation of it, so that, you know, we get something that does not rely on GLFW and OpenGL and stuff. And we also get something written in native Odin and such. And the API will be like inspired by Raylib because we're sort of wrapping it, but then we'll change it so that it's how we want it to be, or how I want it to be. And then so there will be like two phases to this. The first phase is that you're watching yesterday's video. Yeah, hello Cash. Yesterday's video was very tired. Today is a bit less tired. I hadn't slept enough yesterday, so I was just talking nonsense. Anyways, so there will be several phases to this. We will... What I've done so far, I can show you what I've done, is that everywhere where I use Raylib in this little game, I can start it. I hope it compiles. I was just poking around just now with it. Everything in this little prototype that I reused from last year now uses my wrapper. So I've wrapped everything, all the Raylib stuff in there. No coffee this morning. Well, yeah, it's a bit later. I kind of already... There's a bit in the cup. Yeah. See, it's 10:40. I just got... Yeah, it's not a real morning stream. It's a half morning stream. But... So, I managed to wrap all the... I have this carlib. It's not going to be called carlib. That was just a... I was just being cheeky. And I'm gonna make this taskbar a bit smaller. So I've wrapped everything. So if you go to example kale.drawRect, like this. So okay, here draws a collider or something, you know. There is in player.odin, I think there's some draw. Is there a draw in here maybe? Or maybe in like an entity.odin there is like a draw thingy. Yeah, draw texture ex, like that. This draw texture ex is very similar to draw texture pro in Raylib, just that I thought the word pro is a bit weird, and ex is like the extended or extra, like the one that has everything essentially. So I've been poking around with this, and since I got it working with the wrapper, I started to kind of think a bit more about what things I don't like about how Raylib, how it works, and what names don't I like, and then I try to think a bit forward, like how we'll change it, because at some point rather soon we will take all this API here, and we will make a new file that doesn't use Raylib at all, and we should have all empty implementations, and we will start filling them out. And then we'll use, like on Windows, I will use WinAPI and maybe Direct3D or something, and we get there's no external dependencies that aren't in core, or I think there will only be stuff from core, the core libraries, the Windows stuff. Anyways, so that's what we're gonna do at some point. Right now we're kind of figuring out some things here, some details. One thing I was thinking about yesterday, if you watched the very tired stream yesterday, was there's always a weird thing in Raylib with, like, if we go to Raylib.odin, key is key pressed. these names, because when you start using Raylib, you'll be like, is key pressed, is key down, and you will use the wrong one, and it's like confusing and stuff. Like which one is that the key went down this frame, and which one is that it is down. Is pressed sounds like it is pressed down. It is down sounds like it is pressed down. But both could also be that it has just gone down this frame, which one of them is correct. You can kind of guess by this one being released and pressed, but yeah, it's not. I don't think it's not great names. I think some of it comes from Raylib wanting to put is in front of everything that returns a bool, and then it becomes a bit more tricky to name those things. But what I've done here is I said, because there's two things, right? What you're saying is this frame, the key went like the key enter went down this frame, then key went down enter. The key enter is held this frame. Well, key is held enter. It's this. I think using the word held makes it sound like there's no, like if you say key is down, then it can again be a bit ambiguous, but held is not ambiguous in the, like that's something that's being pressed down, like held in place, or unless you're holding a keycap, but we don't have the technology to detect that you're holding a keycap in your hand. So anyways, I think that feels pretty good. We have like in input in this little game here, we have like this key is held left, right, key went down, space AS. It's very easy. I think it's very scannable and easier to understand. Do the same thing with mouse buttons. So I'm don't like, I understand the thing of putting get in front when it returns something, and it's sort of being more of a, what's it called? It's sort of being more of a command when it does something. So for example, draw texture. It just says something. There's no get or is or something in front, and it does something to the internal state of the thing, right? I get that. Well, yeah, you put get in front of things that return something, and then Raylib likes putting is in front of if it returns a bool. I think you don't need to be that stringent with that if it doesn't help you. So in this case, there's no is in front here because, well, we're starting out by wrapping Raylib, and then we change it how much we want. I'm so used to using Raylib that for me it's a very easy way to think about the actual usage code. So that way we can that way we can start from that and then change it in different ways. Like here, for example, we have a get mouse wheel delta, and I'm like, I could just put mouse wheel delta, but I don't know. I think it's fine like that. Anyways, so one thing that would be different from Raylib is that in Raylib you have begin and drawing, and there is an optional poll input. There is an optional thing in Raylib to enable custom frame control so that you can poll events. So you process the events and you swap the screen buffer, which means that you're drawing to some back buffer, right? And then at some point you want to swap so that that one becomes the one that's shown on the screen. That's what that one does. This is only enabled if you enable this in Raylib. So I've recompiled Raylib and enabled that so that while I work on this, I can use that. But eventually, Raylib is gonna go. So that doesn't matter. It's just to make my life a bit easier. I have it like that. Right. So we have that, and so we can show. I also made a little. I converted one of my snake tutorial I took that one and I changed to my own carlib, and I don't have sound support. I think I might. So I'm not trying to be like do everything Raylib does. We won't do 3D sound. Maybe I'll defer that to mini audio, or at least initially we won't have it. we'll see. Well, wait, like that. So this works. I can start this and play. The text looks a bit weird because I don't have spacing between the letters, but we can add that. We can cheat and put it hard coded in for now. Text, where is it? Draw text. I think it's just the one there. You'll be fine. Yeah, there you go. So this runs through the wrapper now, so I can show you how the code looks in here. So we import my little library, and instead of you know, in Raylib we can look in the implementation here what it does. In Raylib you would say set config flags, init window, and then set the window position. This is okay. This one actually shouldn't be there. Do I have? Yeah, this one we can add that, the window position setting. But so I just init the window, and then I load a few textures, and then I'm thinking that since we're doing this stuff manually, the processing of events and flushing, which is the similar to what you had in here, poll events. Poll input. So this is sort of, these two is sort of analogous to these two, right? So flush is flush out the whole whatever you have to draw that is in the batch, sort of. Since we're doing that, then the intern, like, you don't really need begin and end drawing in the same sense as in Raylib. So the only thing those would do is track time, and but you can do that in Odin using core time. So I'm thinking, well, I'm playing around with the idea to not have any time tracking at all in this. So you just say like time now, and then you say how many seconds since the previous time, and then you set it, and then you have your delta time. Right. So that's to get frame, instead of get frame time from Raylib, you can just put this in a global variable somewhere or something. You do this at, yeah, if you, when you need it, you can do something like that. And then we have our input key is held up, down, left, right, like this. And then we have we clear the screen here. And then this begin drawing we will talk about later, because that's what we're gonna figure out. And when we draw a texture, and I know I use some Odin things here that are not available in C. I have like default. Well, I have a default color on the texture, so instead of having all type white, you can just skip that one, because I think that's fair enough. So just say food sprite and then the position, and then we also draw the snake part, and now we have to use draw texture EX because it needs to draw into, it needs a slightly more stuff. I think it uses a rotation and stuff. So it does that here. So this is like draw texture pro in Raylib. We draw some text. The text rendering is not done. I mean, it's not final. And also in Raylib, there are these, how to say, draw texture. So in Raylib, there's always this pos XY, this version, and then there's the V. I default to this one. There is no, this one doesn't exist, right? Yeah, we're only doing, we're doing with, try to do more with vectors. And then down here we present the frame. We draw some other text here. This is if it's game over, but this is if this is the score text here. And then at the end we destroy some textures and we shut down. Right. So that's a little example of how it looks currently. And as you saw, the game works fine. There's no sound, but we'll think about it. We might just skip sound in this library. Like you can have mini audio from vendor, for example, because it's a bit weird when you think about it in Raylib, like you init an audio device and everything that has to do with audio is completely separate. I understand that Raylib is for like one-stop solution for video game stuff, but really all the audio parts are completely detached. we could put them in our own library. We can make our own wrapper on top of Mini Audio if we want, but for now, or something like that. Mini Audio is, by the way, what Raylib uses. So you just cut straight through, you know. But anyways, so that's what that looks like. So we have my bigger game here that I used as a starting point for this here, and this is, you know, my little prototype from last year that, yeah. Can pop off your head and roll around, and it's all a bit weird. Whoop. Yeah. So we have that. So I was just thinking I'll do a stream so we can figure out some fun stuff together maybe. One thing I saw there in the is I realized that, you know, there are some things here. The config flags we can add later, but the set position is silly to even have that there. We have a set window size, so let's just add. So this is my. I've started just. I'd write a bit of documentation here, not so much because. So this is the API file. I write some documentation here, not so much because I think everything is final, but just because I kind of talk to myself through writing it a bit and like trying to think of what it is and how things fit together. One thing you notice here is that this is the front-facing library file, and I want, like, this has helped me a lot already in API, like having an overview and seeing how things fit together. So I really think that this, if you're making a library with a sort of where you try to make the API surface sort of holistic, like you try to make sure there's many different things, but they all need to fit together nicely. It's nice to have a file like this where you can see it. So this one is just like, this is just aliases of set window size. It says here is an alias of _ set window size. That's sort of similar to a header, but I have it here because otherwise everything is everywhere in random files, and I get overwhelmed from looking at it because I'm not sure what I have in the API anymore. But yeah. So we're gonna do this one. Set window position. That one is, you know, that's an obvious name. Proc pos. So how would you switch between compiling and the Raylib? The Raylib implementation will be deleted. It's just a starting point. It will not exist at some point. It's just because I'm used to using Raylib. So when I have all the features in there, I will delete it. But what I was thinking is also we can maybe at some point convert some Raylib examples because it maps, you know, quite nicely. Is window positions, okay, they are in, I was thinking, are window positions in, okay then. Right. You might notice that I tend to not do this because I've always found I do it up here when it's like 4 of them, but when it's just 2 I don't do it because somehow it just makes me not see the second one or something. Yeah, we're gonna talk about begin drawing and end drawing very soon. I'm just gonna add this one, but that's a good set window position I32x, I32y, like that, and then we can delete that hopefully. And now the window's gonna start in the middle instead, apparently. And then we can go to game, and then we have a init window here, and here I can say kl.set window position, And I can say 200, 200, and I think that should work. Should be up here now. Yeah. Okay. Good. Let me see here what I have. Yeah, I put the whole Raylib in here currently because I have modified the bindings a bit because I added the custom frame control stuff. So I had to well, I didn't modify the bindings really, but I had to put in a recompiled Raylib. What have we done here? Yeah, so this is, I changed this morning. It was keys down, now it's keys held, which is much better. And we're going to talk about the begin drawing because that needs to be changed. And I'm trying to figure out what the best way to do it is. Git commit, git add, git commit. So there we go. Right. So that should work fine. So let's now go to game.odin here and maybe find this begin drawing, which I need to change, I think. Yeah, I will make it public at some point. Currently it's inside this project, which is not public because it's just in a folder. I'll just poke around a bit more on stream because currently it's completely useless for anything that isn't like it only implements the things this game needs, and it happened to work for that little snake thingy I showed. If anyone joined late, I also ported my snake example to this instead of using Raylib, so it's using all that stuff instead. But that just happens because that one is so simple. I can actually implement that one without having to add anything to the API so far because it just uses draw texture. But I had to remove the sounds because I don't have sound support. Okay. Let's see here. Begin drawing. Let's talk about what is begin drawing. What is begin? Let's look at Raylib first. What does things do in Raylib? And here we can look at the source code of Raylib to understand better what those things actually do and why they are like that. So in Raylib you have begin drawing and you have begin drawing, end drawing, and all these begin mode 2D, begin end mode 2D, 3D we're not gonna do, then you have texture mode, shader mode, blend mode, scissor mode, blah 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 blah. The reason all these exist is that if you look at all of them on the begin and at the end, they all do draw, render, batch, active. It's because these begin modes change some state in Raylib that is sort of unique to the draw call. So for example, if you change the camera, then you need to submit all the current stuff because the camera comes in as a matrix to the shader. So that comes in a uniform or something, whatever it's called, and then when you set that, when you make draw calls in OpenGL, you set the uniforms and then you do your draw call. So if you change a uniform, then you need to first send out the draw call and then change the uniform and then start accumulating new stuff. And the batches in Raylib work by, if you look at draw rectangle, maybe draws texture pro inside the C code of Raylib. It does RL begin, so it sort of draws it draws quads, and then those are drawn added to the current batch. They're not. This doesn't really. If you look at what RL GL, this RL vertex 3F, okay, what does that do? And this just adds things to the current batch. It doesn't actually send anything to GL, it just stores those things. And then the batch what's it called? The render batch active, just runs the current batch, and that one sets up and sends everything off to the GPU. Yeah, so in Raylib is, so like you say, it's sort of collecting draw commands, so that we can think of a draw the render batch as it collects them all so that you can efficiently draw them using one draw call, because there's a big overhead of doing that. And yes, this looks like OpenGL 2 stuff, because that's sort of what Raylib tries to do, is it tries to be sort of it uses OpenGL 3, but the way it works is similar to OpenGL 2 kind of. Not that I programmed that much. I kind of started with GL when it was free already, but you had the old GL, the begin, what's it called? GL begin, GL end, with the drawing quads and triangles. So we have that. That's how it works in Raylib. And the reason, for example, when you say begin mode 2D is actually use this camera. That's what it means. So because the camera comes in as sort of something that, everything in the current batch needs to have the same camera. So then if you look at what it does, it says draw render batch active. So when you switch camera, you need to send off everything to the GPU. Like here, to start doing this stuff. And then it loads the identity, which is it resets the matrix for the camera, and then it multiplies on to that the matrix for the camera. So it just gives you an empty matrix or a diagonal matrix of ones, and then it multiplies on the new stuff, which gives you your camera. And also at the end it does that again, so that the end mode 2D essentially unloads the camera, which means that it will behave again as if you hadn't set the camera at all. You will just draw in pixel coordinates, if that makes sense. But it also draws the render batch. So that's why, and the same thing goes for shader. All the things in the current batch need to use the same shader. So therefore, when our RL set shader, if you look what that one does, it draws the current batch and then sets the shader. So everything, all these begin and end in Raylib are there because they set some state that the current batch is dependent on, and therefore all of them submit the current batch to the GPU for drawing. Now, because because I want to I'm not making my own. So the question is, why you're making your own wrapper? I'm making a wrapper because that's a good starting point for a new library. Right. So it would be nice to have a 2D game creation library written natively in Odin. And I'm very familiar with Raylib because I've shipped a whole video game in it. And I think the API is quite often nice. There are some things I don't like, but for many things like making simple 2D games, it's a nice API. So for me, it's easy to reason about it. And I can draw inspiration from the Raylib source code because it's open source and stuff. But yeah, so that's why. Bug asked, in Cat and Onion, have you had any issues with Raylib in terms of crashes? I had to fix a few big. If you look at if you look up me on the pull requests, I had to fix some bugs in Raylib. The high DPI stuff, I fixed some bugs in. I barely even used it at the end because it doesn't work that well. And such. I also had some. I didn't have so many crashes in Raylib, but I had some problems with full screen on Mac. In the full screen Mac support with Raylib. Mac full screen support on Macintosh with Raylib is weird. I had to sort of do weird stuff to make it work nicely. There's two ways to toggle full screen, because you can tell Raylib go into full screen, or you can press the little button in the corner of a window on a Mac. And they do completely different things, and when you go back and forth, things break. So I just made it so that the full screen option, toggle full screen, in the options, doesn't exist in my game. You can only press the the button on the window, and then it goes full screen. Because it starts, I think, in window mode, and then you can press that one. That's just I used to have to do that on Mac, because on other platforms it starts in full screen and you can turn it off, the full screen. But on Mac I was like, so there seems to be some kind of thank you. So we've talked about, oh, that's so nice, thank you so much. We talked a bit about why these exist, these begin and ended, blah 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 blah. We're not gonna do 3D, so that one doesn't need to happen. And since we're doing the manual frame control, much of the things in, if you look at what begin drawing in Raylib does, it sets up some time stuff and then it resets the camera. Okay. If we look at what end drawing does, it draws the current batch. Okay. And then it will, a GIF recording, ignore that. Then this happens only if you don't use custom frame control. So it swaps the screen buffer and pulls input events and updates the time. If we're letting the programmer do the timing themselves, then what you only have left is swap screen buffer and pull input events. So we don't need end drawing. Begin drawing doesn't do this. The only thing it does is reset the current. You can think of it as resetting the view matrix, the model view matrix, I call it here. But the main sort of view matrix for rendering. So with that in mind, we don't really need begin and end drawing. And when we're looking at begin mode 2D, that's sort of, if you can think of this as sort of enable camera and disable camera. I haven't done the other ones yet. Well, I did scissor mode, I did. So so initially, yesterday, I had like enable camera, and then there was and then you send in a camera and then can disable camera. And then I had to start adding the submit render batch there. So instead of begin mode 2D and end mode 2D, I was like, enable camera and disable camera. And then I was like, this is a bit weird, because I understand why Raylib has begin and end mode 2D. But it doesn't. Yeah, so this is where I'm at now. This is where I start to kind of like, think a bit more. What should one have? Because I did have like, just you currently just only begin drawing, and that's badly named. Maybe we're just gonna rename that. Not sure yet what we're gonna do. But I did have like enable camera and disable camera here. Blah blah blah. Which both submitted the batch. So let's look at what we have and try to figure out what to name this, or if we need to break it up. So currently we have begin drawing, and there you send maybe a camera and maybe a scissor rect. Because if you think about it in Raylib, no matter which one of these you use, you have to restart, like it submits the render batch. So you could like make a single one that's just like, I want to set the render batch state, and that means we have to submit the render batch, and then you feed it the settings you want. Okay, so monogame XNA used bright batch begin and okay. So that's what I was thinking here, but I'm not sure about this. And also, you see, I also called it begin render pass, but that was not a good name either, really. We can move this one. There's a camera here, but we could move this out of here to draw. I can put it here instead, maybe. So now this would be like process events doesn't really need to be here. I think it should maybe be up here. We'll see. Can we do that? I think so. Because I think that's more reasonable, because otherwise you get older events, kind of. Right? Good. So what we're doing then down here is just begin drawing, and then we draw. Okay, so I guess we could send the camera in here after all. So that works. So currently you can send in a camera and blah blah blah, and if we look at what this does, it's called begin render pass just now, right now, but we can ignore that. So it just draws the active render batch. So I sort of, you know, this is uses some Raylib, some RLGL, and you know, we're gonna work on this a bit until we find an API we're happy with, and then we're maybe gonna start on porting it to something else. And when we do that, we can change the API a bit again, because some API things you might be forced to do some API things because of the way Raylib works. Yeah. So we set the render batch. Well, do we draw the current render batch, and then we reset the matrix, and then if there is a camera here, we use that. If there is a sysrect, and this is a bit silly here, but I looked at what they do, and this will sort of work. This is again because we're using Raylib right now. So we have that. This might work okay. It might be annoying sometimes when you set your camera and then you call some other procedures, and then inside a deeper procedure you want to set the sysrect, but you don't have the camera. I don't think that happens that often in my experience. But maybe it would happen if like you want to draw a few things with a different shader. So imagine there comes, like, you have all the different shader is maybe a shader or something like that. Then maybe you want to switch shader, and like in Raylib you just say begin shader mode, and then you do that, and it will keep the old, you know, I think the shader mode will, let's see what it does. Yeah, the shader mode, you know, it will keep any old camera stuff you have. But it will draw the current batch before doing that, because that is required since you're switching shader. Right. So I'm a bit unsure what the best thing to do here is, and I can show you in the editor it gets worse, because so I have my editor file here, and because I have an editor in the game, and that one does lots of funny things with it uses sysrects to make sure you only draw in a part of the view because you have a side panel. I think editor is broken right now. I can't launch it because, well, let's maybe, no, it does work. So you see you have this side panel here. So the sysrect draws only into this area here. So we can draw tiles here, you know, blah blah blah. So the sysrect draws into here, makes it draw into here, doesn't draw anything out over here and stuff. So we use that, and then we also use a camera, as you can see, because I can move around like that. So that's what we're doing here. We get the editor camera, we clear the screen, and then we the editor view size. That gets you the size of the editor area without the side panel. And then we make a sysrect x and y is 0 here, of course, if we don't specify it, and then we say begin drawing. That might look fine, but then you know, a bit later I want to draw the side panel, and then I need to then I'm just calling begin drawing with nothing here, and this looks like poo to me. It just feels unintuitive and blah. Because in Raylib you would have like begin mode 2D with the camera, and begin scissor mode, and then you end the scissor mode and end the camera end mode 2D down here, and then start with something else. The weird thing about Raylib is that some of those calls are redundant, because you can most often go from you can often go from, like, instead of calling end mode 2D, you could just run begin mode 2D again without ending it, because it will just, you know, if you look at what I do, end mode 2D draws the batch active and loads identity. Begin mode 2D does the same thing but applies on a new camera. So if you just want to switch camera, you can just begin mode 2D, here's a camera, and do some stuff, and then begin mode 2D, here's a camera. You never need to call end mode 2D in most cases. And it's like that with some of these. So I was just thinking if we could have, like, here is a procedure you run to set the state that is relevant for the current batch. But yeah, so I was thinking of, like, okay, we could have, like, begin render batch or something, you know, like that, because that's sort of what it is. You send, when you start a render batch, you send in a camera and maybe a scissor rect and blah blah blah. But then I realized that this is not true, because you can also, for very good reasons, you can manually flush that this will flush the active render batch. And then, you know, these settings on here will still be there, but it will start on a new batch with the same thing. So this doesn't really begin a render batch. It's more like set. It's sort of flush and set render batch state. That's sort of what it does. And that's what all of those does in Raylib. But coming up with an API that's not confusing and or easy to understand, while also not being sort of weird and ambiguous, is a bit hard. In Raylib, I would say this is maybe good for beginners, but many of these things are annoying down the line. Like, I've had problems with, like, there being sort of mismatches between what these do. What's what I'm saying? Mismatches between what these do. I've seen them trash state from, like, you're inside begin mode 2D and then you do a texture mode or something else, and it's unclear which are compatible with each other and not the other way around. Like, because sometimes they ruin the state of the other ones. Like when you do, I think, is it end texture mode that, if I remember correctly, one of these can ruin some of the other ones. Like if you wrap, because some of these you're supposed to be able to wrap inside. Like you can of course do a mode 2D and inside it do a shader mode. But yeah, it tends to, there are some weird things that can happen. And I don't love that. So we have some other, like here I do begin draw. So this is again what I'm talking about. We have a begin drawing and you send in the camera and the scissor rect, and then you draw this. This is for drawing world grid pos atlas. Okay, this draws, what is this even doing? Oh, it draws the current tile. Yeah, this is a bit of a hack that it just starts a new render batch here. Yeah, but this is in my editor, so it's fine. What does this do? Mode entities. This is for the brush, because the brush does weird stuff where it wants to draw in the world. That's why this is like that. So what this thing here is supposed to do is supposed to draw the things in the UI, right? It's supposed to draw like, oh yeah, I've kind of renamed that, haven't I now? It's supposed to draw things in the side panel, mode entities. So it's supposed to, there's no text rendering here, that's why this is broken down here. So it does this, you know, you can place entities. And it needs to render this brush. Hello, Daniel. But we're sort of not inside a camera because we're drawing in the UI space here. So gets the camera and does that just temporarily. But then it does that, and then it immediately says begin drawing, which is like, yeah, which looked like super weird to me. In Raylib, this would have been like a begin mode 2D and begin scissor mode, end mode 2D and scissor mode down here, which maybe is fine. Yeah. It's just, since I don't, this is called begin drawing right now, which is a bit unfortunate because it's not the original Raylib begin drawing. But there's no end drawing, right? Because the present can do an optional flush, or you can flush manually. So present is just like for flipping the back buffer. It says like do flush, okay, then it flushes, which means it draws the render batch, and then it swaps the screen buffer. So what you will only thing you need to do, like if you just want to make a small program, then you can just poll events, draw stuff, and then you run present. That should be enough. I think that's, how does this snake thing look? Okay, the snake thing uses a camera. So it says begin drawing camera equals camera, and then it does that. So yeah, I'm not sure about this part. That's my main API confusion right now. The old method was to have, like I said, was to have enable camera and disable camera, where both, since they both change batch important state, they submit the current batch. It's sort of like mode 2D, but since I don't have since I didn't need a begin drawing and end drawing, it just feels weird to have all this begin stuff. Yeah. Enable camera, disable camera, and then I had enable scissor, disable scissor. I think I'd also dislike the feeling of, being too, like, I kind of like that it's a bit immediate GL-like, but I kind of like the thing where you're just like, okay, we're gonna draw stuff. Here is all the things they need for drawing. So. But yeah. So, begin batch. No, I'm just set batch state. Not sure what the set batch state is not good, because it does, like, it flushes and things. I had begin render pause, and then I was like, okay, but there's no sort of submit render parse or anything, because you sort of can just flush at any time. I think there's a bit of a conflict here where these things kind of set sort of it is sort of stateful, that it sets things that can be used for a while, and then yeah. I'm happy with the rest of the things with the API so far. Oh, this is in the snake. Like, we can look at the snake one. Here you say begin drawing, and then you use present down here. You draw some text, you draw your snake parts, you start drawing with your camera. The funny thing here is that You could probably set, you do begin drawing once outside, and then it would be just continue doing that, which is a bit weird, but it might work. These are currently from Raylib. I will look over the colors, and there's some things that are a bit Raylib-like as well, like the camera is a bit Raylib-like. But those are things that I think work fine in Raylib. So fiddling with the mic. Let's go into the editor code and try to think a bit about this. So many weird hacks in here. It's better to look at. So this thing does. This is in the editor code. So this thing sets up the cam with a scissor rect to draw all the tiles, and then it draws all the entities, and then it starts begin drawing again because it's going to draw to the UI without any camera. So it's like mode and end mode 2D kind of. So yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to adjust my mic. Yeah, Carlib. It's a code name. So yeah. But yeah, let's see here. So it's currently a wrapper, but it should be. I will remove all the Raylib stuff eventually. Like, that's the thing, right? It should be like something that only uses core libs. Something that only uses core libs for Odin, sort of, or something like that. Or maybe something from vendor. Oh yeah, I'll probably use something from vendor because we need some kind of DirectX or something to implement the rendering. But yeah. But now, right now, I'm just trying to figure out this stuff. So we have begin drawing. I mean, we could have an explicit sort of end. I don't want. Is that how it should be? But this would be confusing when you come from Raylib, which is something I have to be aware of, because this will not present, like in Raylib, I think end drawing does everything. This is more, this is begin. Maybe it's fine to have it like begin batch, and then you say all the batch related things. So then it would be like begin batch, and then you just down here you say begin batch without anything. So this one doesn't have a camera or anything. I mean, you can send nil here if you want, but that, you know. Or you could, we could make these not default, have default, so we just send in nil to, but the camera nil system. But nah, I don't know. Or we could have a struct that you send in there. So it's like batch. It could be like batch state or something. And it's like camera is maybe a camera. The reason we use maybe here is so that I easily can check on this inside. Scissor is maybe a scissor. Is maybe a rect. And then you would just feed well, it's not batch state, but it's more like batch settings or something. And then it would be like batch settings. And then you could just, then you would just do this. Maybe. Maybe you don't even need to have this rect there. You can do like that. You know. Could do something like that. Begin batch. Camera is camera. Scissor. And then only thing down here is you would need like an empty one. Or you have a default argument like that. And this will begin batch here will flush the old batch. But the only weird thing here is that you can do this, and then we're not in the same batch anymore, but we're still using the same batch settings. But this is just an intermediate flush of the batch, but you will still keep this. I think that's fine. I think people won't be like, oh, if flush sort of starts resetting all your batch state, then but yeah, so you have that stuff. Maybe that's good. Somehow that feels less weird than begin rendering over and over again. Begin batch. We all know code names become project names eventually. Well, I think I'm gonna change this one, but we'll see to what. But maybe not. Who knows? We can have an end batch that does a flush and sort of resets the, like, we could have this. Which and maybe it should be like this: flush batch. This is the proc, and then we have end batch. It's also just a proc. And then we don't have this one. So flush batch is a special one because it doesn't end the batch. It just flushes in between if you really need it. If you need to flush without, if you need to submit the current stuff without changing the settings because you want to for some reason. The weird thing here is that when you're doing these kind of things, you kind of all the time have to think about, yeah, carlib raylib contains, there's no raylib in this file here, right? Well, maybe there's a helper at the bottom. No, there isn't. So this file contains the Raylib implementation that just does all the Raylib stuff. You see, some of it is very simple. Most of it is very simple because it's a wrapper at this point. But it's already starting to become a bit of its own thing. Begin batch, end batch, flush batch. Maybe that's good. The weird thing here is what should present. Like then this one doesn't exist. Process events and present. Present has currently a implicit or like, well, you can an optional flush that it does. Because otherwise, if it doesn't do that, then you just like otherwise it will just nothing will render if you're just doing some simple stuff. You just open a window, draw some textures and stuff. Then this, if you just don't do this, then nothing will render anymore. So maybe the optional flush here is okay. Flush batch. Does this one really need to be flush batch? It's sort of okay. Let's try this and see how it feels. That's also kind of what you have to do here. You have to actually try it because you can seem to think how much you want, but when you try, it's gonna feel weird or something. But the only thing is I'm thinking if flush batch should be flush batch or not. I don't know. And also this one can just do this instead. So I need to call that one. So we have begin batch. And then the question is if that one should... Here we have batch settings. And if this should even have... Like, there's no reason to... I think I'm gonna do this, so you must specify it. But you can just use an empty brackets if you want. Batch settings, what should we call this one? It's sort of the... Well, it's the settings for the batch, but it's sort of... I think there's a better name for these kind of things. It's the things, I mean, it's not... We'll call it batch settings for now. Very easy to change. Right, so we do this instead. And then we go here and we say if... Okay, so then we can do this. Camera okay is settings. Let's call this one BS. Raylib. Hello, Jerry. Let's see. Scissor is a scissor. And then we do like this. We can call this one S. Whatever. Right. So we get that from the batch state, batch settings, I mean. And then we need an end batch as well. End batch, which will, I think it will just call begin batch with nothing. That's the weird stuff, right? That you can do that. And I don't love these kind of things. That then it becomes a bit Raylib-ish, where like the end is not really needed, unless like the only reason end is needed is if you want to revert back to the original nothing at all state. But if you also want to like render this thing with this settings and another thing with some other settings that you have, you do those over and over, then you never really need the end one. Flush batch. Okay. Well, we have that one there. Okay, good. Good. Let's compile and see what happens when we fix all the compile errors. So we have begin batch. Camera equals cam, like that. And then we could down here, of course, say kl.endBatch if we want. And then we're going to have all these things in here. Begin batch. The reason maybe it's better to use a struct instead of all the parameters is that it's a bit easier to look at this if it becomes many, and it sort of forces you, well, people will be more likely to write a name here instead of just putting them in a row, and then you don't know what is what anymore, kind of. And here, we can just do end batch instead, maybe. Yeah, this is not... And like I said, these things in the editor here that I'm changing are sort of also hacks to at a weird point in code draw in like a cursor for the brush that you're placing in the editor. That's why they're there. Okay, let's restart it properly. Have a look. This works. Does the editor work? Seems like it. Yeah, it does. Right. Yeah, I don't have any labels. In the left there's supposed to be some selector, but there's some text rendering things to figure out. Leak 256 bytes. Oh yeah, that's the editor. Right. What the hell is this? Right. I guess the nice things about the sort of begin mode 2D in Raylib and stuff is that it feels a bit more reasonable to put the end thing when you end the batch. It's like, well, it's just a batch or whatever, You probably get sorted out at some point. Somehow it feels a bit like the connect between this one and this one feels a bit less somehow than if you use very specific ones like these ones, begin mode 2D, begin texture mode and stuff. Hello. I'm trying to figure out this batch stuff. So this is, yeah, for those joining late, it's instead of the begin and end mode 2D and begin and end scissor and shader. And I don't have shader here yet, but I'm trying to figure out what a good API for it is. I mean, we could have those from Raylib, the big, but they've just confused me sometimes when you wrap many inside something else. Begin, what is it? Is it the texture mode? I want to look at what it does. Raylib. I think it's this stuff here is weird, for example, because it's like in Raylib maybe you do begin mode 2D, and let's see here, and then while you're doing that you want to do a texture mode, and then you end the texture mode, but then it just resets your stuff back to however it was. It sort of ignores the things that were, and this is because there's so many different of these functions that it's very hard for it to keep track of what was the original state that you wanted. And since they are separate functions, you can't really stack them in any way you want. So you can't be like, okay, I want texture mode with a camera and this shader. Sometimes there will be, for example, if you want to continue rendering using that camera afterwards, then suddenly this and texture mode trash that and stuff. So because they are separate, they can be harder to combine. But if they come from a single, like this is the settings for a batch, then you can combine them in any way you want. That is, maybe there would be some unreasonable things to do. I'm not sure. But yeah. So let's think about this again here. We begin the batch, we draw. We draw over here. Here we just do that. Maybe this is fine. Just the camera. Draw proc, there's the begin batch. And there's no big reason for this taking the camera. I think it's because I at some point needed a camera for something, but currently I don't. The question is if end batch should exist. It doesn't do anything. You can just do begin batch with empty, and then you have ended your batch, right? Yeah, it's a bit complicated. It's complicated for the reason that I don't want it to be hard to understand, but I also don't want it to like cause bugs when you're trying to do things later. But the things that makes things easier here is that we're only gonna do 2D. Well, I don't know if that really matters, but in Raylib 3D is when you do 3D in Raylib, you get way more draw calls because it has more materials and stuff on things that might get used and you didn't know about it when you use draw model or something, and then you get separate draw calls and blah blah. The automatic batching with 2D is usually far more simple to understand. Anyways. Yeah. It's always nice to do a bit of a rewrite. But it's nice because I used Raylib so much, and I've even looked a lot at the C code that I know what it actually is doing. And then when I'm doing something for Odin, I can both use Odin features to improve things, and I can also change things in ways that I would prefer. Maybe it's not begin. Maybe is it like set up a batch? Is it like if we imagine that this one doesn't exist, then we can have begin batch, but we could also have like begin batch. And this one also flushes, so it's sort of like it starts a new batch with these settings, which we must means that it flushes the old batch. What do I do? Is the boring. I was just trying to look, because I've used this funny way to do the API, and since it goes to an underscored version, I was thinking, oh, what happens if I do F12 on this? And Sublime is like, can't find begin batch because use an alias like this. So I can't get to this one, which is what it should. Like if you understood aliases, it would be like begin batch, go here to underscore begin batch. I wish I didn't have to have the sort of underscored versions, but this is the best way I've figured out to make a separate API file like this. I mean, I could have begin batch as a read procedure that calls underscore begin batch, but then you have to boilerplate pass all the parameters, and it's gonna suck. Set up the batch, you can initialize the batch, you can handle this kind of, I mean, yeah, I looked a bit at some other, I looked at Love 2D. No, that's not what I meant. Yeah, the batching stuff. Love 2D has a flush batch. And let's see here. What does it do? Yes, it's always good to reset the current graphics settings. Drawing color white, the background color black, disables any active canvas shade. So I was thinking of like having a just like reset, and then you can provide the settings, or reset batch, but the reset also sounds like it discards the current batch almost. Set background color, set point style. I don't know if this one, this one uses shaders as well. Where are those? I'm saying this is the... So we just run set shader. This sounds confusing. Sets or resets a shader using the blah blah blah. All drawing operations until the next set shader will be drawn using the shader object specified. This is in Lua, but it's quite popular and it's very people who do Pico 8 games, and if they were like Johan Peitz, who did the Engineers and stuff, he ported some games to Love 2D when those games outgrew Pico 8 because it's also in Lua. Oh yeah, Bellataro is made in it, yeah. So this one sets the shader, and then I guess you have to present it at some point. I saw that, I think. Flush batch, and then there's a present. It presents all the results from the operation, for example, see log. Okay, does this one manually flush? Draw loading screen, blah blah blah, new font, set color, set font, set color, clear. Draw. So this one, I'm pretty sure, flashes also. Hello and welcome. I am trying to figure out what to name or how to structure my batch things in my library I'm making. That is, it's based on Raylib, but Raylib, it's just wrapping Raylib right now, but it's at some point Raylib is going to be removed. So now I'm looking at Love 2D. You can look at, does SDL3 have batches? Sprite. Okay, this is with the GPU. That's a bit more low level. SDL render present. It's always good to find a present. Render present. Okay. GPU render state description. What does that do? Render state desk. Set render GPU state. Set custom. Okay. This function sets custom GPU render state for subsequent draw calls. This allows using the custom shaders with the GPU renderer. Blah blah blah. This function should be called. Okay. Well, what does it do? That's always the question, right? What does it do? Oh, this is in the include. See. How to find things. Help. Render. I have to go into, is it in here maybe? And then SDL render.c. Oh, so many files. Check render magic. What does that do? Okay. Yeah, but SDL is a bit more. No, the magic was just, it was not relevant, I think. SDL seems a bit more low level. Well, the SDL render is not that low level. I think SDL render is not that far from, like, it's a bit more low level than Raylib, but it's if you go all the way to SDL GPU, it sort of gets. But SDL render still has like concept of textures and stuff. Like you can just draw a texture on the screen, that's what I'm saying. Just like here, draw it here. Which, with like if you use SDL GPU or Sokol or something, you have to submit geometry to render something. Do we have any other funny graphics APIs? We've looked at Love. STL does not, is a bit too. I looked at SFML. It's very C++, so it's very, everything is just very weird. Like, you have a render window, and on the render window you can do stuff. What is it does? It can clear the render window. Set view, get scissor. Okay, what happens if you set the scissor? Huh? No? Okay, where is set scissor? No? Okay. Maybe in here. No? It's like GLFW. Well, GLFW, does that one... Well, what does it... Yeah, GLFW, does it even... Isn't that more like just opening windows and handling input and stuff? Yes, FML is also one of the first big frameworks I used. Back when I was like doing lots of C++ things and I wanted something. It was quite fun for using with C++, but now when you look at it, it's very like, it's just so hard to understand how to use it because everything is in different classes with some methods everywhere. But yeah. GL clear. Yeah, this is just, you just use it with GL and you can pull some events, but it's not gonna do any batching for you, as far as I know. Blah. Anything else? Love to the Raylib. It's like Pygame, I guess. Maybe that's quite popular. What does that do? Wow, Pygame is does things. Monogame. Yeah, that's XNA. Yeah, we look at Pygame here a bit. Try to figure out how to draw. Okay, we draw a... How do you draw a... is it image maybe? Or is image a texture or a... No, I don't know. Transform. GFX, what is it? Drawing shapes. Pixel array. Sprite must be. Weak sprite, dirty sprite, render plane, render clear. Sprite group. Yeah, we're looking at different frameworks because I'm not sure what a good idea is. I'm looking, yeah, like someone said, I'm looking for inspiration because I'm a bit... I have the begin batch stuff and then I'm like, should I just remove the end batch? And what should you actually call these things? And what is a good concept? But this one just... How do you do a sprite in Pygame? Okay. Okay, maybe there's an example instead. Stand. Yeah, stand on the shoulders of giants. Exactly. Here's Space Max. Oh, SourceForge. No, I don't want to go to SourceForge. I never want to go to SourceForge. This website links to SourceForge. I'm leaving. Monogame. What does Monogame do? Monogame is famously a continuation of XNA. But yeah. Now, so I'm not making a framework around Raylib. I'm just using Raylib as a starting point for, like, I'm wrapping it because I like making games on top of using Raylib, but I would like something native in Odin and stuff. So I'm using that as sort of a starting point. So currently it wraps Raylib, but eventually I'll write something on top of it. But I still like to have a sort of Raylib-like thing to do the rendering, right? Yeah, and I think it's a good thing for doing like 2D games. Okay, this is Monogame. But no, but some people do that. They build the system as they go, and what that means is that, like, maybe you're just like, okay, I need to render a quad, and you have a little file with your rendering features, and you just add that in there. But since I already like Raylib, I know that I want something similar. But also it would be fun to maybe try to get it far enough so that I can put up the library, so people that are using Odin can use it instead of Raylib if they feel like they're using a native library. Oh yeah, but yeah, no, okay. Now I guess what you're misunderstanding is I'm not making a framework around Raylib. I'm making a Raylib replacement. So I'm not doing a higher level than Raylib. I'm making roughly at the same level as Raylib, but yeah. Let's see here. Right. Yeah, native as made in Odin without any C libraries, well, except like OS, like, use Win API to open the window, use Direct3D or Vulkan, or I probably won't use OpenGL. I probably won't use Vulkan. Maybe I'll use Vulkan if I do a Linux version. But it's just easier to start with on Windows. Start with opening a window in Direct3D, like Direct3D 11. Right, we were trying to look at this guy. Okay. Monogame. For some reason, it's good to find where the present. Okay, draw sprite, whatever. What's this? Okay, blah blah blah. Sprite batch. Okay, here we go. New sprite batch, graphics device, content load, sprite position. Okay. Sprite batch, begin, end. Okay, it draws. And then I guess on this sprite batch you can. So what's a sprite batch? And this is a bit object oriented, of course. So might not blend state. Let's see here. Sort mode, blend state, sampler state, depth stencil, rasterizer state, effect. I guess effect is a shader. Yeah, this is like transformation matrix that's to put on extra transformations. Okay. So you can make a whole sprite batch. And you see, this is just a begin sprite batch. Can you flush it while it's in flight. I mean, that doesn't matter. I don't need to copy these things, but okay, and let me see here. You draw a texture onto the batch like that, right? The nicest thing about checking these things is also that if many other people seem to do something like that, then at least you know you're not the only one having this idea. Of course, people have bad ideas all the time and do weird things, but at least you don't feel so alone. You feel validation. Because there's lots of drawing things and flushes all. Okay. Can you... I guess there's no in-between flush. So you do the thing and then you end it. And that flushes it. Right. I think my problem here is that I'm trying to be a bit in between. I'm trying to be a bit in between Raylib, but also like Raylib, you know, it's very little code. You kind of like do a loop, clear color, begin drawing, draw a texture, and done. If just I like it to be beginner friendly, but you can just copy as code for a beginner sample, like a beginner thing. The thing here is that if you don't use any camera, don't use anything currently, you won't even need a batch. That's different from XNA or Monogame there, that you wouldn't need a batch because there is a batch always. And you don't say which batch to, like with this kind of stuff, you could have multiple like with the XNA stuff, you could have multiple batches in flight and draw into different batches and then submit them all. With this kind of stuff, you can't because you have one batch. Actually, I think in RLGL, there is support for multiple batches. You can have a separate batch, but it's yeah, it's not really a thing. Yeah, Raylib is very beginner friendly, and I'm trying to keep it that way so that, like, if you look at the snake finger, it's mostly, the only thing is that I'm toying with the idea of doing my own time management, so that you have to use like core time or something, but yeah, exactly. Usually you figure out what a batch is when you do more advanced things. So it's good that you don't have to know what a batch is. But I guess if you, yeah. So in this case, it would be like, okay, okay, this is in the snake. This is the old API. In this case, it would be like begin batch, and then you have to say that you want. The only way to use a camera then is to say begin batch, and then you're like, hey, what's a batch? So that's, you know, because you just wanted to say, hey, use this camera and stuff. The annoying thing about that is, like I said, in Raylib, chaining the begin mode 2D and the begin shader mode and those kind of things is weird. That's a, so you have to pick there, like, do you want to make it slightly less convenient to use a camera but make the API a bit more nicer, and then is of course the stuff that XNA does there, or Monogame, with being able to draw into multiple batches. But I think that is outside the scope. I mean, it is you could have like a set batch so that you can for example return an ID here, an optional thing. It sets the current, starts a batch and sets it. And you could return an optional ID and have a set batch. That's sets that one back if it's still valid, and then you can draw into that. So it can be like set batch, draw a few things, set another batch, draw a few things, and then you can submit them all later. That's kind of almost possible with Raylib. It's just that I think RLGL supports it, but Raylib is a bit like only talks about the current batch, kind of. So that would be like, they're not really separate rendering layers. They're more when you tell the GPU to use stuff, it sort of, you feed it to tell it which shader to use. And Raylib, you know, by default, let's find the default shader in Raylib, shall we? I think it's load shader. It's somewhere in the core data. There is a default shader. Or maybe, no, it's in RLGL, I think, actually, the default shader. That's why. Unless I'm mistaken. Or is it? Or is our... Here, load shader default inside RLGL, right? Well, this sort of creates a shader for you, but here we see how it, for example, if everything that's drawn as part of a batch uses the same shader, so naturally if you change shader, then you need to make a new batch. The model view projection that comes here, MVP, is sort of tells it where it should be in the world and where the camera is and how the projection works, like how the view is distorted and stuff. And that comes in as a matrix. And these uniforms here in the shader, they need to be set when you tell GPU to, hey, draw stuff, which is called a draw call. Then you need to have set those up. So if you want to change the sort of this matrix here, which is related to the camera. So the camera, the whole camera is sort of, all the information about which camera you use is part of the data in the 4x4 matrix. It's 16 numbers. So it's all in there. And then so naturally if you change the camera, then this thing needs to change, and then it needs to make a new batch, because the batch is sort of, you can think of all the geometry is coming in here through these attributes, and I think and then it sort of just makes lots of quads on the screen that uses different texture with different they have different positions and texture coordinates to pick from. And then naturally, if you change if you need to use a different thing here, then they can't be part of the same sort of call to draw in OpenGL, because it needs to have swap this out. So if half of the things you draw on the screen uses one camera and half uses another, then it will need to split them up, because it can't just submit them all at one go. There is also, if you're using different textures, where is called diffuse, texture, the samplers. So that's also, this is why when you use, if you keep everything in a separate texture and draw it, then everything will usually end up in separate draw calls, because for every time it draws it, when you run draw, what is it called in Raylib? Draw Texture Pro, the procedure. You run, where is it? This one. Every time you draw this, and if you use different textures here, then it will need to make a new batch, because the batch comes in again, uniform sampler texture, blah blah blah. So that's why when you use an atlas, so use an atlas with all the textures inside, so you have 200 textures in one texture, then all of them will use the same texture here but different source rectangles within that one, and that will make it just, that will just then this will, the texture will stay, and because the texture stays, it doesn't need to make a new batch for each one, and the actual coordinates of the things on the screen, those comes in used as attributes, which are not, which can vary per, like you can have many primitives drawn on the screen, so you have lots of triangles and stuff drawn on the screen, right? And they have different, contain different vertices, and it sort of just makes a big list of these triangles to draw and sends them off to the GPU along with all the other things for your batch, your camera matrices and the textures and stuff. So if you use the same shader, the same camera, and the same texture, the same camera, same textures and the same shader, the same texture, and the same camera. If you use that, do that in Raylib, usually they will all be collapsed down to one batch, and it will draw with one draw call, which is significantly faster than if you have like 10,000 draw calls, because you're drawing with 10,000 separate textures or 10,000 different shaders. And you can sort of see here, I think, this is Draw Texture Pro in the C code, and you can see somewhere here, I think, what it does. Here is set texture, right? And let's see here. Look at this. If the current batch texture ID is not the texture we're trying to draw, then, well, this code is a bit, there's some stuff happening, but if you look down here, eventually it draws the render batch. So that's why this never happens if it's the same texture ID, then it never gets to here. So it's just like, yeah, if you use the same things enough, then eventually you use the same texture, shader, and camera. There are some other things that can trigger a you can break your things into batches as well as into separate batches. But yeah, that's just a little side track on what batches actually are. And then we come back to the idea of that in Raylib you can just say begin mode 2D and end mode 2D. And it will break things into batches for you. And it's beginner friendly because you're not mentioning the word batch. That's why I would assume that's why Raylib has done it this way, because you can start thinking of batches, like the batching sort of happens implicitly, and you like, well, it still will do for me, but you don't have to think about the word batch at all here. You can learn about it later when you realize that you draw using 10,000 different textures. Yeah. Yeah, end texture mode has broken things for me before, and I don't think end texture mode is that, beginners don't tend to use it, because what texture mode doesn't, I don't know if you know really, but for those who don't know, texture mode is for using a render texture. So instead of rendering to the back buffer of the, instead of rendering to the screen sort of, you render into a texture that you can later render on something else, which beginners tend to not do, but still very annoying. I don't know why it's not begin render texture, like, or maybe it was too long. Maybe you can see that it takes a render texture, but it's just begin texture mode. It sounds a bit like it almost is for drawing with texture. The other set, no, it's just if you look at add texture mode, it just reloads the matrix. So if you use begin mode 2D up here, it applies a camera transform to your matrix, and then if you're using that camera, you hop into a texture mode, right? So you do begin texture mode. I don't even know if this one. Yeah, look, it even destroys your like, it seems this thing has specific use cases, but it feels like you can almost use it for other things, like drawing while inside other drawing modes. But it kind of doesn't work that way. It's a bit weird. And you know, all these end functions then have to sort of guess what is it that you want to go back to. Yeah, the intuitive way would be some kind of push pop. That's a bigger API burden, and it's a bit more annoying for doing simple things. Push pop would mean that you kind of have like an array or a stack of things, and the things at the bottom of it always respect all the things that happened before it, and sort of you can go back. So when you end it or pop it, it just. But yeah, I thought when I started using Raylib, because I've looked at some things, I knew what a push pop thing was. I assumed that this did some kind of push pop, but it doesn't. It just guesses what you want to go back to when you end it, and sometimes it will be correct and sometimes not. It's yeah, why the projection matrix changes though? Yeah, that's a good. But what you can do is you can begin texture mode and then do begin mode 2D, I think, and render. But so what they thought is this: they thought that you, instead of like, you do this begin texture mode and then you render with your camera. Right. So that's the idea. But to me it's a bit weird. To me it should just be like, just tell it to render into this texture. So this thing assumes that it's sort of like, instead of begin and end drawing, you use begin texture mode and do your things, and then end texture mode, and then maybe you do begin drawing to draw to the actual screen. I've had cases where I wanted to draw into a texture in the middle of my usual rendering. Like suddenly I was at the point of like, okay, now at this point we want to draw into a texture. I want to continue after this to draw into my normal stuff. So I'm already inside a begin mode 2D. I'm like, in an editor, for example, I was like inside, and then I was like, okay, I want to draw this to a texture because we were doing some stuff here, and then that didn't work. Because this one is like begin drawing texture mode. That's sort of what it is. It's for replacing your begin drawing, so it's supposed to be at the root of everything. But I tried to use it not as that, and it just got confusing. This is a Raylib philosophy podcast now. So anyways, I don't, maybe maybe this would be good, like push camera, blah blah blah. No, it's we're here for detours. It's I'm not gonna be able to finish this. I need to go eat lunch anyway, so I'm not gonna be able to finish this. But maybe we can have push camera like that. Then of course people will be like, what do you mean push? Why are you moving the camera? You know, that will happen. And then we could have like pop camera. Wait, you can't just pop the it's more of a stack of batch settings. So if the one you're currently at is not a camera, then pop camera would be like, maybe it's more of a, okay, maybe it's more of a push. Do you have like a global render context or something? Well, currently it's Raylib, so there is a global render context. Push batch settings, and then you could be like pop batch settings. But I mean, this can be even worse. I'm not doing the thing here at the end because I'm just thinking out loud. Think for a beginner is like, okay, I want to use a camera. Now I must write push batch settings, and then I guess you could have like set camera, and what it does, it pushes a batch setting. But I still want this to be beginner friendly. It doesn't have to be as beginner friendly as Raylib, because I've already tossed out like the time. I think you should use core time, don't skip, because there's, when you turn off the automatic frame management in Raylib, there's nothing left except the timing management. What if there's a context that stores camera, projection matrix, etc.? Yeah, I guess you could use like a maybe you could, there is a thing in Odin, right, where you can do it context based if you want to. Let me show you something here. Overview Odin, blah blah blah. It's called I don't mean the defer statement, but defer out. No? What's it called? What is it called? I think people know what I mean. It's the one to make something happen implicitly at the end of a scope. But it's not defer. There is the thing for when you call a procedure. It should be in here. I've seen it before. Do I have it in my book? I don't remember. I will find my book. I can find it in the... Yeah, I thought it was defer out. Deferred out. These are the one. Thank you, chat. These maybe you could use to be like, so what these do is that you put them on a procedure, and when that procedure when the scope in which that procedure ends, then it runs a procedure with some parameters fed into it. That means that you could push things onto a scope and have them disappear automatically when you leave that scope. Kind of. I'm not saying this is a good idea. This is one option you have. So then it would be like something like the third. This is like push. You can have like push camera. Yeah, and then it's pop. Batch. This would be weird because now it will start like this thing would be a proc, right? And it would need to like flush, like end the batch. And that will happen automatically at the end of a scope if you push it. It's just a lot of weird magic happening instead. So probably not a very good idea, I think. Because imagine if you set the camera inside a procedure and then suddenly it's just submitting batches. But maybe you wanted to use the procedure to set the camera and then do something else, and then after the procedure finishes, it's actually going to draw more things in the camera because you were like, you named it set camera nice settings, and then it does that for you. So this is a bad idea. Which of course is a critique to my approach as well, because begin batch, then you would need to like get camera and put it into begin batch when you need it. Maybe yeah, API design is hard, especially when it's in the end it's a trade-off between user how friendly it is to beginners, how powerful it is, and some other things, and how error prone it is and how annoying to use and stuff. I guess you could have like batch set camera is a proc that takes a camera, blah blah blah, and then Casey talks a lot about writing the usage code first, but I'm sort of doing a bit back and forth here. I have some usage code where I'm sort of like but we can try to think like that. Batch set camera. So begin batch. You know, this is sort of a kind of implicit APIs. You know, some APIs would be like batch, and then you would need to put your batch here. You know, we need to do that. That's usually bad for beginner friendliness, and it's bad in some other cases too. If you don't really need it, you don't need it. Yeah. Begin batch. Set camera. I kind of have to go eat something soon, actually. So, but it's been interesting. To talk about. Yeah, the context is sort of feels a bit like command buffers. Like in some more advanced rendering APIs, you would have like, make a command buffer or something, and then you have to have that one around and feed things into it, and then submit it at the end, which is not at all what the beginner is interested in. The beginner is interested in just drawing thing on the screen. And but there's also the question, am I doing this for someone else or for myself? What do I find annoying with Raylib? Okay, thank you, Thomas. I'll have a look at that. I don't think I watched that one. Designing and evaluating reusable components. Right. Yeah, I need to go eat or something. But I'm sort of doing it for myself, but having in the back of my mind that it should not be annoying for a yeah. Well, we'll see. I'll think of it. Yeah, I'll make sure it's something that I want to, but the thing is, I don't mind Raylib's batch concept for the most part. Of course, it's not multi-threaded, very multi-threaded friendly, but I don't like writing multi-threaded code for rendering simple 2D video games anyways. So, meh. But we'll see. I need to figure something. Oh well, I'm gonna go eat because my brain is starting to run out of energy anyways, and stuff. I'll just leave this on the screen here. Not on, I'll turn off the stream, but I will just leave this and come back and look at it later. Okay, I'm gonna have lunch. Thank you for watching.